Thank you, Joanna, and greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. I am extremely pleased to be presenting information about dyslexia. Working with students who are diagnosed with dyslexia and have significant reading difficulties has been the great passion of my life, I think, and I'm still learning. So I'm thrilled to share with you what I've learned, and interested to hear your questions that you may have about it. So, also just to let you know, I have done quite a bit of training as a dyslexia therapist and also trainer. I hold certification in the Wilson Reading System as a trainer, and also I've studied significantly a different reading intervention program known as Spell Links for word study and spelling curriculum, and they're both complementary and often offer interesting interventions that are useful in each program. So with that in mind, what I want to talk about tonight is, first of all, to talk about brain function in dyslexia, because dyslexia is a brain-based condition, and how the brain functions has a lot to do with the reading behavior that we see. Also want to talk about the causes of dyslexia, risk factors for dyslexia, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about scientifically based reading instruction, and what the science of reading actually is. That's thrown around a lot, and it's important to understand what it actually is and what it is not. I also want to talk about how dyslexia is diagnosed briefly, and also just talk a little bit about what parents can do to support their children at home, which you know, is certainly a valid concern and desire. So, starting out just in terms of definition, again, dyslexia is a brain-based disorder, and it results from difficulty that the brain has processing sounds in language. And the core deficit in dyslexia is the sound processing, or what we call phonological processing, and that difficulty results in a number of has a number of downstream effects that affect a child's ability to learn to read and write and spell. And so dyslexia is, in terms of specific learning disabilities, dyslexia accounts for about 80% of them. So it's a widespread, among the world of learning disabilities, it's quite common. Sally Shaywitz, who was an icon in the field of reading research and brain science, who did a lot of the original studies that helped us understand how the brain functions in dyslexia. She calls dyslexia an unexpected weakness in a sea of strength, which I think is an important thing to keep in mind, because as we will talk about, there are a number of strengths that we see in people with dyslexia, and it's important to keep those in mind while we want to help them with this one particular weak area. So in terms of incidence, dyslexia accounts for about roughly 15 to 20% of any population group will have dyslexia. You know, and dyslexia, of course, is a continuum, which we'll talk more about. But of the group that is diagnosed with dyslexia, you know, 10 to 13% of them have some phonologically based difficulties that are fairly amenable to intervention and remediation. And then there's a percentage, 7 to 10% of those diagnosed with dyslexia have some fairly serious difficulties that result not only from processing sounds, but also from some other cognitive features that make learning to read more difficult. So I think what we have to look at when we're looking at, you know, when we're understanding dyslexia is, first of all, we have to understand what it takes to be a reader. Because as I will probably say multiple times during this presentation, our brains did not evolve to read. We were never necessarily meant to be readers. We did evolve to speak, and as our brains grew bigger and more capable of directing intentional behavior, we developed the ability to use our speech capacities to then create a code that would stand in for the speech sounds in language, and hence reading was born. Reading is much younger than speech. Reading really only, people have been reading for basically about 5,000 years, which is not long in the overall history of humans. People have been speaking for, you know, somewhere 20 to 100,000 years or something like that, depending on how you define speaking and language and so on. But nonetheless, so it is important to look at what it takes to deal with this code that allows us to read as well as speak. So in order to recognize words, we have to do a lot of, we have to have a lot of awareness of sound. We call that phonemic awareness, phonological awareness also. And that's a precursor really to being able to read. So phonics, you know, and everybody thinks, oh, phonics is the beginning. Well, actually, it's sound awareness that enables phonics to begin to be accessible to children. In other words, decoding, breaking the code of the letters, what the letters stand for, and being able to, what sounds they stand for, recognizing them and blending them together really fast. So we also need to recognize a lot of these words that we learn. After a while, we have to recognize them by sight. You can't get very far by sounding everything out. It takes too long. You lose the sense of the meaning of the words. So we have to be able to recognize words by sight and develop what we call automaticity. So, you know, so that eventually you don't have to think about what you're reading. You just have to think about what it means, and that's our goal. And to that end, we have to have a knowledge of vocabulary, of word meaning, and we need to be able to understand connected text when we read. So in order to do that, we need all these things that came before, plus we need some background knowledge and an ability to draw some conclusions from what we read, which is what's known as inference. And everyone who is a reader has to basically be able to accomplish these things. So understanding that helps us figure out where breakdowns occur in people who have dyslexia. And here's one of my favorite, and probably one of everybody's who does anything with reading, favorite graphic, which is the Strands of Reading. This is known as the reading rope. And if you look at this, you see as it becomes unwrapped up here, or it starts out unwrapped, in order to read, first of all, here's word recognition. And these strands are really important. This is, we have to be aware of sounds, that words are made up of sounds and syllables, and recognize that. Then we have to be able to learn the sound and spelling, the spelling and sound correspondences, so that we can map sounds to letters so thoroughly that we don't have to think about it. And then we have to develop sight recognition of words, familiar words. Now that's a lot, but it's not enough. So again, this needs to get increasingly automatic as children learn to read. And then there's the whole other area of language comprehension, where background knowledge, the more you know about something, the better you can understand reading about it. Vocabulary, again, aware of the many words that exist in our language. We have to be able to be familiar and comfortable with language structures. In other words, how words go together in a sentence, and how word meaning affects meaning of what we're saying. Verbal reasoning, in other words, being able to recognize when there are inferences and metaphors and so on. And then we have to have knowledge of print concepts, genres, things like that, literacy knowledge. And that's a hugely complicated process that goes into then it becomes woven into automatic reading. So, and that's what brains are preparing for in children as they are learning to read. As they emerge, they're learning all the principles of word recognition and gradually developing some of these other comprehension areas and weaving them together. That's the reading rope. Okay, so how does the brain do that? How does the brain accomplish all that, especially when we really didn't, as I said, our brains were never meant to read. But it turns out our brain has what's called plasticity, and it's changeable. It doesn't have, it has some very specific areas that are designated for certain things, but it also can make new connections that will accommodate current situations and so on. For example, for a long time, oral language was the major means of communication. And when the Greeks developed their alphabet, which is the basis for our alphabet in English, people began to write and read things. And and brains, which had been really geared toward memory of oral, what was said, and memorizing things and so on, began to change a bit to accommodate decoding this language thing and being able to make sense of it. So in everything with reading comes from oral language, which is important to remember, because it's not oral language and written language are related, very much so. And what the brain does is it has these older neuronal circuits, in other words, electrical circuits that are used in oral language, and it kind of recycles those in order to process written language. So it's a very clever thing, our brain, and makes some very unique changes and connections, which can be good and it can have a downside as well, but we won't go into that now. So early, environment is very important to brain development, and reading to children is one of the things that we know is crucial for language development, because reading to children will lead to development of sounds, hearing sounds in words. The more words that children hear, the more language that's used around them, the more they're being set up to recognize sounds and be able to eventually decode them, map them to letters. Reading to children also leads to vocabulary development, because when we speak, our oral language tends to be a bit telegraphic. We don't tend to use some of the words that are in our language that you find in reading. But if you're reading to children, they get the benefit of hearing those words in context. They also get to understand the relationship between words and sentences. And I don't think, and something that's come out more recently that we in some ways ignore is that reading stories leads to some emotional development by understanding another person's perspective. And of course, for children, I can't think of a better example of this than the Frog and Toad stories. Frog and Toad are friends, but they're different, and they have to get along together, and sometimes negotiate difficulties, but they're very supportive. And so it's a great example of how people can live together and care about each other, but be different. So as literacy develops, the brain will rearrange itself. The brain rearranges itself a lot all through development, and probably into adulthood as well. The neurons in the visual cortex have to become more specialized, and the neurons that the neurons that are connecting areas in the brain develop myelin sheaths somewhere between the ages of 5 and 7, and in boys somewhat later. Now, what this myelination allows is for those neural connections to be more stable. And once that myelination occurs, children are neurologically ready to learn to read. So that's why, teaching reading in terms of teaching the alphabet, the sounds of the alphabet, words, and so on, tends to occur somewhere around 5 to 7, roughly, and sometimes a little later. But that's about when brain development has enough brain development has occurred that children can learn these things and also remember them. And so here's a graphic that I think is interesting about how does reading change the brain. And so these are all adults, but the changes that you see in these brains reveal how reading changes the brain. So what you see here is, in an adult who does not read, there is far less activity. And the red and yellow points out written sentences versus spoken sentences, and you see, compared to the others, a lot less neural activity there. Okay, and that means they're very, they're better able to understand spoken sentences and much less able to understand written sentences. Then here, as these adults become literate, what you see is there's a great deal more of understanding or of activity when reading occurs. Spoken speech is still there. And then as these emergent readers become fully literate, you see again a stable, expanded area of understanding of written text, and still, of course, spoken sentences. So this is, this parallels what happens in the brains of children as they learn to read. Emergent to beginning readers, emergent readers to proficient readers. So the development of the reading brain involves 5 different areas that have to develop. And the first one is phonology, which is the sound structure of the language. And there's that PHON, which is the Greek root for sound. And then once the sound structure of the language is understood, then the task becomes recognizing letters and linguistic patterns of letters. So what we call this is orthography or orthographic parts, which refers to the written, single word written letters and words. Along that same line, semantics have to do with the meaning of words. Then, children are exposed to far more words and meanings of words that they are not familiar with and learn. And again, the syntax, how words combine in connected text, in sentences, in paragraphs, and so on. How we write sentences with a subject and a verb, even though you don't have to use those terms. And then, of course, there's morphemes, which is that's actually a big topic these days. Some of these things have their, have eras when they're, people are discovering all kinds of things about them, and morphemes or and morphology is one of those topics. It's big right now, and that has to do with word roots, base words with prefixes and suffixes and so on. English is what's called a morphophonetic language, so that it depends a lot on understanding the sound and the phonics of words, but also how those words can change with the addition of prefixes and suffixes and so on. And that deepens understanding of words by and use of word use by being able to use those. So here's the brain. This is the left side of the brain, the left hemisphere of the brain, which is where language activity primarily occurs in in people. And in the back here there's the occipital lobe, which is the area that enables you, that picks up visual stimuli and enables you to see. So it's important then that letter and word recognition is going to start here, to recognize words and recognize individual letters. And that then will move along to, or the neural networks will connect with the part of the brain that enables sound and symbol connections. This is where word analysis occurs, but recognizing the word and the sound and that they go together. Then this area in the temporal lobe is where semantics or language comprehension occurs. And here in the frontal part of in the front of the left brain are where speech sounds are connected to all of this. And all of this basically results in, when a word is seen, recognizing the letters, recognizing the meaning, and recognizing how the letters are sound and blended together. So, and this goes slowly at first as children are learning to read, and becomes much, much faster, so that these connections become very efficient, and the reader then can recognize words and read really pretty quickly. And so, again, during reading, the left hemisphere of the brain is very active, and there are particular language areas of the brain that have well-worn pathways, and you see electrical connections that are active when you do an fMRI scan on an individual who is reading. And over here you see typical readers, or I should say, non-impaired readers. You see all kinds of electrical activity going on through the left side of the brain as they're reading. Now, in the case of readers with dyslexia, what you're seeing is far less activity, because the pathways between the centers, language centers of the brain in the mid to back part of the brain are not functioning, and they're not accepting stimuli that will go along in these pathways that will allow the reader to read. Now, the good news about that is that with good instruction, reading instruction, intervention, intense instruction, we can change that. And we've seen it on fMRI scans, so that the left side of the brain in a reader with dyslexia who's also been remediated with a very effective reading instruction program, you're going to see that left side of the brain is going to look a lot more like a reader who is not impaired. And so that is the difference. And just one more brain thing here. We come in first with the occipital lobe, which is where visual letter identification occurs. And then pathways then lead to the meanings of sounds and words to understand what's being heard. And then here, processing the sounds of language to create speech. So here, recognizing the letters, processing what the letters mean and how they go together, and what they sound like. So if you see a word in like CAT, cat, the brain processes those letters, and then that triggers meaning. Oh, okay, that's a four-legged mammal that goes meow. And then here we have the speech sounds, at, there. And that's kind of only it happens really, 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 really fast. So that is that. And I think for some reason, we've already done that. And here again, you see an image of brain activity in a non-impaired brain, and here you see in the impaired brain, there's activity, more activity on the right side of the brain, but all of these things over on the left side of the brain are not functioning. Okay, so I think now would be a good time. Does anybody have questions about, I've just gone through a bunch of sort of neurology here, and I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody has. Have we had any?
There was one that was just wondering about the definition of a word, which I already helped with. But is anybody maybe typing in some questions? I don't have any right now.
Right, that's okay. You probably, yeah. I think so. So that's great. Thank you. Well, then we'll stop again as we, as we move forward.
It looks like we did just get one in.
Okay, great.
From Amy, and she is wondering about how you test for dyslexia.
Okay, well, we don't do fMRI scans to diagnose dyslexia. That is, and we will cover that a little bit later, after how do you diagnose dyslexia, and and what's involved in that. That is done by a psychologist using certain measures, and I will cover that. So that's great. So now we get into like what causes dyslexia. Well, we know that dyslexia is the result of a brain glitch, which is a highly unscientific term, but I have heard brain researchers use it. Something goes wrong, wrong. There's a glitch that disrupts the neural pathways. So where does that glitch occur? Well, it might be genetic. There are in some families, there are a number of people who have a history of dyslexia, and that has a genetic component. That doesn't explain all dyslexia, but it does explain some. And there may be glitches that prevent that have to do with interfere with the neurons and the circuits in the brain. So there may be little structures that throw the circuits off and affect the neurons that may occur. And then there may be issues with processing perceptual motor things like, for example, vision, or some other just kind of motoric or movement areas that, or areas of the brain that affect movement that can affect reading. Then there's also some areas, some issues that can affect the ability to process concepts and so on. Maybe speed of processing, slow processing, other and working memory, things like that, that can affect how well a child can learn and hang on to learning. So, and again, here, any one of, all the things that I just described are sort of seen in this graphic. There may be a genetic foundation for dyslexia. Neurons and circuits may be lacking. The neural structures may be affected. And then, motor and conceptual processes, such as being able to see, being able to hear, may affect that. Because if you're not hearing sounds, it's going to be very difficult to transfer that knowledge to, and map those sounds to letters. And that, that affects then how the reading behavior actually occurs, or what happens when children start to read. And it can be, so it can be any number of actual causes, and but none of them have to do with motivation or fault. So there are some misconceptions about dyslexia, and I think it's important to make sure that we are clear about those. First of all, dyslexia is not related to IQ. There are incredibly intelligent people who have made major contributions to our lives in the past and in the present who also have dyslexia. I'm thinking particularly of somebody like Thomas Edison, who basically was kicked out of school in 3rd grade because they thought he was too stupid to learn. And then he went on ahead and invented the light bulb and the phonograph and any number of inventions that we still use today. It's not uncommon. As people think it's rare, it's not. As we looked at, you know, a good 20% of any population cohort, it may be, may have be on the dyslexic continuum. Some people think it's rare in females. It's not. It happens in females, probably diagnosed a little more in males, but definitely exists in females, and not just a few. It is not related to motivation. In fact, some of the best students I've ever had also had dyslexia, and they were incredibly great problem solvers and were determined to, you know, to work hard and deal and manage their reading difficulty. Some people think letter reversals are a sign of dyslexia. That's not necessarily true. It is true that some children with dyslexia get certain letters reversed, like B and D. But in general, you'll see letter reversals in young children. It's sort of a developmental stage, and as they develop and as their brains develop, they get that worked out. So letter reversal in and of itself is not necessarily a sign of dyslexia. And also, and this is also important, dyslexia is not caused by visual impairments. It's not called, you know, it's not caused by the eyes not moving in a certain way. People often think eye tracking would be therapy, would be helpful. It's not. And that's, I'm sure all this stuff kind of floats around out there. So it's really important when you're looking into facts about dyslexia that you really check your sources. There's another myth that it can be outgrown or cured. That is not true exactly as that's spoken. Really good remediation can allow a person to be a reader. That doesn't mean that person is cured. The brain structure and function of people with dyslexia is inherently a little different than it is in people without dyslexia, and that, you know, is a lifelong condition. So it's a brain-based, when it's a brain-based condition, we can reroute the neural networks, but we can't necessarily affect how fast someone can read, or you know, or other some, you know, or how they process language ultimately, and so on. So it's important to know that it's there are things that will stay with an individual in spite of good remediation, and good remediation is great. And fortunately, we have all kinds of ways of managing dyslexia now that didn't exist for people even a couple generations back. On the good news is there are some strengths in dyslexia. the right hemisphere of the brains of people with dyslexia tend to be larger than those of than the right hemisphere in people who are do not have dyslexia. And we think, now this is a little bit speculative, but it is the right side of the brain has a lot to do with visual stimuli, awareness, artistic expression, movement, and so on. So spatial awareness may be enhanced and may be something that exists that can affect, one's ability to play sports. It can affect one's ability to, awareness of body movement and acting and so on, mechanical aptitude. There are an awful lot of people who are, who can process information in 3 dimensions quite well, and they become plumbers and contractors and builders and architects and surgeons and so on, because they really have that ability to perceive 3 dimensions and how that things operate. People with dyslexia can be very creative to solving problems. They oftentimes think out of the box because they don't necessarily process things in the same exact way that people without dyslexia do. They visualize oftentimes very well, and visualization helps with reading and writing. And then 2, artistic expression. So, you can look in history and find artists and athletes and actors and so on who are also dyslexic. So, again, these are things that we notice. This is not absolutely proven, but I certainly see it in the students that I've worked with. So, dyslexia does exist on a continuum. So the severity of the dyslexia will determine what kind of an intervention, So there are people who have, sound processing issues, who are closer, maybe closer to, they have a low performance, but they may be closer to average. They have some phonological coding difficulties, but all the way to those who are significantly impaired. And each brain is different, so we have to look at each brain, at each child or individual separately for what will be the best intervention for that person. So then we look at possible risks and things to look for. Again, I said a family history of delayed speech and language development or literacy problems is something to keep an eye on. Is the child developing language development and so on on track? And that's going to be an important thing to follow. Rhyming is something that kids learn to do. If a child has difficulty rhyming by the age of 4, that may be a sign of some language impairment or sound processing impairment. Then by the end of kindergarten, most children will be able to name letters. So if children are having errors, if they're forgetting the names of the letters, that's another thing to be aware of. Sometimes there, children and adults will have difficulty finding the words that they need to express basic thoughts and ideas. They're not very specific. That can be again a sign of some language challenges. And then difficulty recognizing familiar words that that kids see all the time is another warning, just red flag. Difficulty with understanding spoken or written language. And then also remembering sequences, remembering the names of colors, remembering the days of the week, the seasons, the months, and so on. That can be a sign of some memory issues that could affect reading development. And then directionality, oftentimes people with dyslexia get mixed up with directions, right, left, up, down, yesterday, tomorrow. Although I will say my directionality, I am certainly not dyslexic, but my directionality has been challenged from day one anyway. And then difficulty identifying the sounds in a word. And that's a big one because words are made up of sounds. And if a child can't identify the sounds in a word, that indicates some challenges in processing of sounds and phonological processing. So of course, what happens is that, when somebody has dyslexia, reading becomes a terrible struggle and it's exhausting. Here, this is just a quick example to give you an idea of what that's like, perhaps. This is actually a text taken from The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. And this is part of an eye tracking study for dyslexia. Now, I said eye tracking is not a good therapy, but it is an interesting, but eye tracking to see what kind of focus and time spent on decoding words is useful to, in the case of looking at how people with dyslexia process written language. Here, here's the text, and here's somebody who's not impaired. Their eye movements are moving along. They stop, the little blue dots mean they've paused briefly there, but they're moving along from, from line to line, and it's not taking that much time. However, here is someone with dyslexia reading the same passage. And what you notice is, first of all, they go back and forth a lot. So the red lines, they're repeating, they're going back, they're pausing significantly on parts of the words to figure out what it says. And imagine how much more time it takes to read these few lines than it took this person. And you can imagine how unpleasant reading can be for someone who has this kind of difficulty with figuring out the words and so on. And I think that's another way of looking up, at how dyslexia affects an individual, in addition to the, fMRI scans. So before I go on to the science of reading, I am going to pause here again to see if there are any questions coming in.
Yes, we got a flurry of them.
Okay, great.
All right, so let's see here. There were a few questions around diagnosis. Let's see here. How do you confidently diagnose if learning disabilities are a result of visual issues such as teaming or tracking versus dyslexia?
We don't. Eye tracking is really, that what I showed you there is merely, is with the eye tracking study, is merely evidence of how someone, spends a lot of time going over the words and so on. So we diagnosed dyslexia based on a number of psychological assessments, and which I am happy to go over. I had put it at the end, but I'm happy to go through that if there are lots of people wondering how it's diagnosed. But eye tracking is not part of the diagnosis. So visual tracking, there may be issues that kids have with eyes, strabismus, and some other issues, but they are not. Those are not part of the experience of most children who have dyslexia.
Okay.
It seems like it should be the eyes, but it's really not. It's the processing of sounds and internally the mapping of the sounds to the letters, which
Okay.
we'll talk more about too.
Okay, yeah, there were a few people wondering about either second language acquisition, or if a child is unable to tell the difference between the sounds of letters, but they don't have a hearing impairment.
Sure.
Could it be the
Yeah.
age of the child, or at what point would you want to look into something?
Yeah. Well, there are, and in fact, children do sometimes have difficulty telling the difference between, say, the sound of a B, B, and also a D, D. They are, they're made, the letters look similarly, are kind of similar, but they're, the circle is on either side of the line, and B and D can be hard to discriminate. So sound discrimination is something that you can train. And actually that's something we do what we've learned to do really well, is teach phonological awareness. But you may notice, parents may notice that the kids are not very aware of sounds. They may not be able to recognize this, what beginning sounds versus ending sounds are, and things like that. And those kinds of things we now know that in preschool, good preschool programs do a lot of phonological awareness training, and it can be fun, it can be game-like, and so on. So, but those are things to be aware of, yeah.
And one that just came in that is a good follow-up. If your child is dyslexic, should they avoid foreign language until they reach a certain level of literacy in English?
Oh, that is a hard question. I think that and I think I would say that for a child who has dyslexia, it's not that they won't necessarily be able to speak it, but I would say that a child with dyslexia does need to focus on sounds and symbols in their native language. So immersion programs, as wonderful as they can be for many children, foreign language immersion programs can be really challenging for some kids if they have dyslexia. They're not successful. And not only that, but it trains them in different sounds for the language. So then when we start working with them with, being really learning about the sounds in English, it can just add some challenge to it, that's all.
Okay. And one person was wondering what percentage of people who have dyslexia, how many of them have been formally diagnosed? Like, do we have a guesstimate on that, or?
Well, I think the statistics, the incidence is based on people who have been diagnosed, and there's been cross-cultural studies too that estimate percentage of population. There are certainly people who are not diagnosed. As reading, in the past, it didn't make that much difference because the job market was not that many people needed to be proficient readers. But today, reading is an important skill for economic, job success and so on. So there are far more people who are, that we're picking up. And of course, in the schools, since the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was passed, there's a lot more services in school for children who have some reading issues. Not all of them are fabulous, but we do pick up a lot of reading difficulties through the schools and become aware of them.
And then
Okay.
one other person had a question. It says, how is dysgraphia linked to dyslexia in terms of the brain?
That is a complicated question. And oftentimes you will see dysgraphia. Dysgraphia can be related to dyslexia because dysgraphia may have to do, again, has to do with letter formation and also spelling. And one of the things we see in dyslexia is it affects reading, but it really affects spelling. So I don't, the brain is basically has many of the same sort of glitches, if you will, but it's depending on, and this is where, depending on where those glitches are, it may affect sensory motor capabilities, it may not. So it's hard to say specifically.
Okay.
But we often see dysgraphia along with dyslexia. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, let's talk about the science of reading. Because the science of reading is important, is very important for the treatment of dyslexia. Because what we need to do is follow what the science of reading tells us that informs reading and spelling instruction for all children. And for those with dyslexia, it may ease some of those problems, and it guides us to how to intervene for children with dyslexia. And what's important about the science of reading, it's based on a body of scientific research that's about reading and writing that has been conducted over the past 5 decades, and it's based on literally thousands of studies from across the world and in multiple languages. And I mean, I get journal articles that talk about, issues with people who are dyslexic in Spanish and things like that too. So I mean, it affects in Chinese and so on. So it is truly, it's truly a multiple language phenomenon. And what this evidence shows is how reading and writing develop in non-impaired readers, but also why some of them have difficulty. It also has told us how to assess, teach, and improve student outcomes, and how to prevent reading problems and how to intervene for reading problems. Because it's important to keep in mind that there are a tremendous number of kids who don't read well. And not all of them have dyslexia. In fact, many of them don't. They have had poor instruction that has sort of ignored what science tells us about reading instruction and what's good for everybody. So, for prevention, we want every kid to have instruction that's based on scientific reading research. In a general classroom, This kind of instruction will move at a quicker pace. The children generally require less repetition, but it will also, through progress monitoring, give us an idea of who it is, who's having difficulty, who's having trouble. And we can identify those children, and we can also give them extra repetition and help. And for those who, for whom that extra help support doesn't make the difference, then we can move to a more intensive intervention, which again, based on scientific reading research, will move at the pace necessary to serve the student. And usually the instruction is one-on-one or in a small, very small group of students, which is as opposed to the general classroom, because these students need more repetition, more practice, and again, maybe some special activities that help them develop develop the memory for words and so on too. So basically, you know, the variables are dependent on where the student is. So, you know, the intervention needs to be based on what the science of reading tells us. So how intense it is, in other words, how often will we see the child? I mean, and how deep does it go? Do we need to really peel apart, you know, the language and so on to help the student understand it, analyze it, and remember it? Frequency, how often, and how long, duration, how long do we meet with the student? And then, of course, the teacher in an intervention for a student with dyslexia needs to have knowledge and expertise, and have a significant amount of training to do it. And so then we talk about that reading instruction, and what it needs to include are awareness of sounds in words. So for example, I might say, or for phonemic awareness, I might say, all right, say seat, and the student says seat. Now say it again, but don't say s, and the answer is eat. So we're not writing any of these words, we're saying them, and just by listening, the student is learning to manipulate sounds, to drop them, to add them, to change them around, and so on. And that's really important for, and to just be able to pick apart what are the sounds in the word dog, d, g. Letter sound correspondence then puts that sound awareness to awareness of sounds and letters together, so that the student can easily break the code. Fluency has to do with how the reading rate and accuracy, because fluency is absolutely crucial to being a proficient reader. You have to be able to read at a rate where you don't have to stop and you know, where you don't have to stop and sound stuff out, and that you're accurate enough that you're not guessing at words and coming up with words that change the whole meaning of what you're reading. Vocabulary has to be addressed and perhaps built. Comprehension is the point of all of these other activities, so that it's the end point in reading instruction, that that students can understand what they read, which sounds simple but is harder than you'd think. So here we have phonemic awareness. I just went through this, but it's a little graphic. I might just as well say seat. Now say seat, but instead of say b, and then they'd say beat. That could happen as well. We want to get sound associations with all the letters and with their consonant digraphs and all the short vowels. We usually always start with short vowels. So so again, English has 26 letters, but it has about 42 to 44 sounds, depending on who you ask. We want to teach children to segment words into sounds. We often use tapping on fingers, but it doesn't have to be. It can be also finger tapping on a table to segment the sounds. So this is a way of, this is a sounded out strategy, which is a good strategy and important, and they need to know how to do it. And then we want to move beyond it so that they recognize the word. And so this brings us to, again, phonemic skills we need to be able to blend sounds. So k, ol, ap says clap. And then we have to be able to analyze sounds, words, and that will help us to remember words. It isn't enough to be able to sound out words. We need to have enough practice with fooling around kind of with words that will basically result in what we call orthographic mapping. In other words, that the letter and the sounds are so thoroughly ingrained in the child that they can remember these words and not have to sound them out all the time, which is really important. And so what orthographic mapping does is that it enables, after a while, children to read words by sight and to spell words without having to sound them out and take a lot of time and so on. So they have to have letter knowledge and they have to have awareness of sounds. And then we really work with those, with rhyming and manipulating sounds and letters and so on. And this is actually one of this decade's hot topics, orthographic mapping, and we're seeing a lot of studies about it and a lot of work with it, and it's important, I know. So here again, you need to identify words, you need to be able to blend sounds, you have to have letter sound knowledge, and that will help you identify unfamiliar words. So it's identifying words. That's different from word recognition, where you've got permanent word storage that you just know, boom. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Phonic decoding is a step toward that, but we want permanent word storage to really make the reader independent. And spelling and handwriting also are an incredibly important part of teaching reading. So letter formation is important to that sound symbol mapping process. So handwriting, unfortunately, schools have developed this thought that this idea that we don't need to teach handwriting because we have, keyboards and touch screens and things like that, and that's wrong. I'll just say it. We teach handwriting very specifically at Groves and very intentionally, along with teaching reading, and it's really worthwhile because life is easier if you can read and spell and write letters legibly. And of course, because what we also know is that the word processing capability is really important, but younger children really can't do it very well until they're kind of close to the sixth grade in age, stage, and so on. So teaching them handwriting when they're younger will make their spelling and reading and also writing process a lot more automatic. So I encourage everybody not to ignore that. And, again, where, children develop an awareness of how printed words function and how, we read from left to right here with English and European words, and others, are read differently, and, brain function adapts to all these different methods of print, but ours is definitely left to right. So we want to teach that words are made up of sounds, and the code represents the sounds. So we might have ship that has 3 sounds, but slip has 4, and we have, and then we have syllables and we have suffixes. We also want to teach also morphemes, that we have suffixes and prefixes. So the use of a word changes by adding these prefixes and suffixes, and how the words, the more you know about a word, the faster you'll read and comprehend it. So that, learning that jam, J-A-M spells jam, is great, but you also need to be able to recognize it with all this other, prefix, suffix, and so on, so that you can recognize it easily and understand it. Semantic development, as kids come along and develop, we want to make sure that they are exposed to high quality, useful vocabulary. And if we really want to go into morphology, we can start looking at Latin roots and things. But also the fact that words have multiple meanings, polysemy. That's such a great word. I love saying polysemy. Anyway, all it means is that words really can have multiple meaning. You take the word play. Well, children like to play. We can go to a play. In football, there are certain, or in basketball, we have certain plays. And spring, for example, spring is a season. It's also a device. It's also a small bit of running water. So all of this adds to word consciousness of, how word use changes, and how words can rhyme but mean something differently, and so on. We can teach these patterns, and the more we can teach, and the more we can teach students to notice them and identify them, the better off they are for that. And and then we have to teach, we want to work on reading fluency. So so that children are accurate and they can read with a reasonable rate. And what fluency does is it gives us the time to think about what we read. And if we're busy decoding the words, we don't have the cognitive bandwidth really to devote to the kind of comprehension that they're going to need. So we work on all of these things. And then we want to talk about oral reading. And I'm going to sort of skip through these because I think what's important, and this is an area where parents can really help, and teachers too, is that students really need to have consistent and regular oral reading practice. And I don't mean necessarily oral reading by listening to books on on Audible and Learning Ally and so on, although that's great for exposure to great writing, but oral reading, older students benefit from oral reading practices as well as younger students, and it doesn't require a bunch of complicated strategies and advanced degrees and so on. It doesn't need to be timed. What I like to do is to have, what I recommend is for my students to read to read, like weekdays, homework-wise, every day if possible, but to read for about 15 minutes, ideally, and to read with some kind of text that they can read about 80% of the text. So this will be an activity that an adult will need to sit with the child and to help the child, give them the word if they stumble over a word. Don't try to make them use their sound out strategies and various things like that, because we want to give them the experience of a sort of a fluid oral reading experience, and then and then explain what words mean that they don't know. So that is really a crucial practice. And I like to do it not with reading over the same thing over again, but finding books that are of interest to students. There's a ton of them, and to have it be a relatively low stress thing, that we're not going to make you tap out every word and so on. We're going to, because the brain will pick up patterns. The brain is a pattern-seeking organ, and will pick up patterns through reading experiences that that you don't necessarily have to teach. And so, oral reading, I really think, is a great thing to do. And so now we'll talk about diagnosis. How is dyslexia diagnosed? So if you suspect that your child has dyslexia or any learning difficulty, you really need what we call psychoeducational evaluation. And that's done by a psychologist. And you can have it done privately. There are plenty of psychologists who do either psychoeducational or neuropsychological evaluations. And then you can also get this through your public school system. And so, we have a diagnostic department at Groves, and that does regular evaluations and reevaluations with our students at the school, but also who see clients from outside our school. But the public school system can provide that as well. And what it consists of is, some cognitive ability, cognitive potential and processing assessment. That could be something that you could call an IQ test, but it really is more than that. It's looking at cognitive strengths and potential weaknesses to see what a child's or an adult's cognitive profile is. Then there's, in addition to that, there's achievement testing. So we usually do some testing of how well a child processes sounds. There's word decoding and word recognition. There's a fluency measure, a comprehension measure, spelling, some often and written expression, sometimes speech and language. That's done separately if needed. And it also includes some math assessment. And from that, you get an idea of what an individual's cognitive ability and potential is, as opposed to how they're achieving. And oftentimes you'll see with a child with dyslexia, they may have great cognitive potential, but all of the areas that make up reading are somewhat discrepant from that. And again, looking very specifically at what kind of decoding and what kind of spelling errors and so on exist, that will then enable a psychologist to make a determination of if it's a specific learning disability, in in math, or which would be dyscalculia, in writing, spelling would be dysgraphia, and also reading would be dyslexia. The final report would provide those test scores, and it also includes a narrative section explaining the scores and offering specific recommendations for how to intervene if those are indicated. Now, if the school district does it, the diagnosis they come up with may not say dyslexia. They may say there is a specific learning disability in reading or math or writing, etc. But really, it amounts to the same thing, really. You have a right to request an assessment from your school district. You have to write a letter to them and request an assessment, and they have to do it within, I think, 60 days. Now, I'm not an expert in this part of the law, but I know this is the case. So, and that is free, and that is your right to do. You may find when you get that, that you want to have, maybe in addition to that, some additional assessment done by a private psychologist or not. And then you then begin to work with the school and and they decide whether the child qualifies according to their special ed recommendations and so on. So before I take questions, and I'm happy to take questions as long as you want to ask them, I just want to go through some resources that I have for you. I think the Sally Shawitz's book, which is in its second edition, Overcoming Dyslexia, is an excellent introduction to dyslexia. She's very knowledgeable. She writes well. And From Speech to Print is probably more for teachers than for parents, but it does explain a lot about areas of linguistics that we need to keep in mind when we're working with remediating kids with dyslexia. Equipped for Reading Success by David Kilpatrick is a terrific resource for anybody who wants to work on phonological awareness, and he has little exercises to do and an informal assessment and so on just on that. And then the Reading League is an excellent organization that has a lot of resources and conferences and so on. And the website is right here. And the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, terrific. And I think you'll find that I've given you a handout from there. They've got a whole section on what parents can do, which I think is very useful. And here we have some other, organizations and so on. The other one that's useful is Reading Rockets too, and I've given you a handout from them as well. So with that in mind, Joanna, do we have questions?
We have a few left, yes.
Okay.
So first, from Kristen, it says, my daughter has dyslexia, and when she reads to me, if I use my finger to track the words, she can read much faster and clearer. Is this common? Some teachers have told me not to help her follow along with my finger.
Well, I disagree with those teachers very strongly. And yes, it is great to follow along. And it is a common practice. I do it myself, and I teach teachers to do it, to have the child touch the text and follow along, because they will read it'll be much better. And frankly, for anybody, this is a great beginning to for as you get older and more proficient and you're reading more complex text, oftentimes you need to pick up I recommend for students who are for reading comprehension, pick up a writing implement before you start, because you want to follow the train of the author's thought, and you may need to make notes, etc. So the idea that you should not be tracking along is that's wrong, and it's not the teacher's fault. They just don't know, and that's why we do what we do, to try and help with that.
Mhm.
Great. Yes.
All right, and then when a child is going through remediation, how do you know if it is working, and should the child know?
That's a great question. I'm so glad somebody asked that. When the child is in remediation, the tutor or special educator, whoever is doing the remediation, should be monitoring the child's progress and collecting some data about it. So, for example, at Groves, we do an ongoing progress monitoring of reading fluency. We do use, we have a measurement software, AimsWeb, which gives students passages to read at their level, and we set a goal and see if they can improve their accuracy and speed and so on. We also give regular, kind of independent charting of how well they read single words, how accurate they read those, which tells us if they've mastered concepts enough that it's okay to go on to the next one. And then we also assess at the end of every unit, every step in the reading program. A tutor should have some kind of progress monitoring and should share that with parents. If they're not doing that, that's not good practice.
Okay. Another question. My child was diagnosed at Children's Hospital as having cognitive communications deficit that's consistent with dyslexia. Why wouldn't they just diagnose it as dyslexia?
I really have no idea. I mean, I'd have to see that, I'd have to see that report to see their reasoning for that. And I don't know what they mean by that. So, so that's something special to that psychologist in their department. I've never seen our psychologists do that, or other ones either, but that doesn't mean it isn't okay. I guess I would just, ultimately, I would look at the recommendations from that report, and because that's like the practical part of what you can do, what you should do, that the psychologist recommends.
Okay. And then,
And I mean, Children's Hospital is wonderful. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just don't know why they did that.
yeah. Wondering about the slide where the short vowel sounds were listed. Was there a reason it was given in a specific order of the letters? I think because the E was in a different order or something.
Yeah, usually what we usually do when we're teaching a child to read initially is we start with short A. We start with short A because it is the first letter in the alphabet, but also sometimes A has a lot of different sounds, and we want to really emphasize that A says ah, and we stretch it out and so on. And then we more or less, usually the order that we teach it is something like A and O first, and then we might add I, and E and U would come last in terms of just instruction. And part of that is that because E and I get mixed up, O and U get mixed up, A and O get mixed. So vowels are harder to teach generally than consonants, because because their sounds depend so much. I mean, they all have so many different sounds, and English is a really hard language for to decode, you know, and its spelling rules are positively wacky.
Very true. Let's see. Amy is wondering about what you would recommend to say in your letter to request your child to be tested at their school.
I would just write a very straightforward letter and say that I have concerns about my child's progress in reading. I am concerned that I am concerned and would like to request that the school do do an assessment to determine if my child has a reading disorder or dyslexia. You can just say reading disorder too, yeah. It doesn't have to be complicated. All you have to do is just say, I'm concerned, I request an assessment.
Great. Michelle is looking for, I guess, just what you would recommend for parents who are wanting more information or resources so they feel confident when if their student is diagnosed, that they have the information they need, and you know.
Yeah, well, if they're diagnosed, the psychologist is going to give a number of recommendations, and I would follow those, you know. Otherwise, if you general information, any of the resources that I've listed here are going to give you information. And again, I think the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity has a tremendous amount of information, as does Reading Rockets. And then, you know, the Reading League is devoted to science, the science of reading, and the International Dyslexia Association has huge amounts of information.
Great. Have you noticed a trend to diagnose an SLD in reading versus naming it dyslexia?
Well, it used to be, that's a great question. It used to be that that nobody used dyslexia, that it was not accepted. I mean, it was like, we know it exists, you know, people were writing books and things about dyslexia, but all these things are coded, diagnostic codes, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And when they redid that manual, the DSM, version 5, there was a big fight about whether to call it SLD reading or dyslexia. And actually, they ended up saying you can call it either one. So, you know, there are advocacy groups who say dyslexia really is more descriptive of, you know, of the syndrome and so on, than specific learning disabilities, you know, reading. And they're right. So I applaud the fact that dyslexia is being used more. The state of Minnesota allows it. It does invite we still have controversy though, because, you know, there are criteria in the DSM-5 for the diagnosis. And so we're starting to see kids who have been well remediated don't meet the criteria for the SLD reading disorder. And so they, you know, say they no longer have dyslexia, which is ridiculous, because dyslexia, even if well remediated, still has consequences, and, you know, it's brain-based and so on. So that's the kind of stuff that that I'm hearing about more recently. It's great they're using dyslexia, but you can't treat, you can't, I don't believe you can call somebody, you know, diagnose somebody with dyslexia and then say, oh, guess what, you know, he doesn't have it anymore. Well, that's stupid. I mean, you know, and because there are going to be things that that will affect a person as they develop and so on. They may be well remediated, but they may be a slow reader. They may have issues with spelling. I mean, there's just a number of things that can hang around, and to imply that it's cured is just it's stupid. You know, but then that's, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word stupid. That is ill-advised.
All right, we have a couple more.
Yeah.
Melissa has a child with dyslexia, but believes that her child has dyslexia, but has not been through an evaluation yet. Her child goes to a private school, and they are suggesting the CTOP, CTOPP, as a preliminary assessment before doing a full eval. Does that make sense in getting an idea if dyslexia may be there?
Well, the CTOP, yeah, the CTOP, we give the CTOP regularly along with the full, you know, a full evaluation if we suspect anything that's related to, you know, to sound symbol difficulties. The CTOP stands for Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing. And what it does is specifically assess processing of sounds, you know, and it doesn't include any word lists for reading. It just does, and it does a very good job of that. It also tests, does a rapid naming assessment, which is an important thing to do also. However, I mean, that to me, I would want to see an assessment, a full assessment. If I suspect my child has dyslexia, I want the full picture. And so I want a cognitive assessment, and I want some other measures of achievement in addition to the CTOP. The CTOP's fine, but you know, I don't know that that I mean, to me, the CTOP adds extra information on top of a psychoeducational assessment. You know, so that's my thought.
Okay.
I would tend to want to push for more myself.
Yeah. All right, well, final question is from Jill. She's says, what advice do you have regarding a child that is angry and defensive about anything having to do with school and learning? We're figuring this out late because of an uncooperative school situation. He's in 7th grade now. Are there child psychologists that specialize in learning disabilities?
What was the last part that you said there in the question? I just want.
Are there child psychologists that specialize in learning disabilities?
Yes, yeah, there are. I mean, you know, again, you need a referral for that. And, you know, it might be worth calling the Learning Center at Groves Academy and just saying, explaining the situation and ask if they either have somebody or if they could make a referral perhaps to somebody. I don't know anybody right off the top of my head. I will say it is important to do remediation on a child who is older and very defensive and angry and so on is really difficult. And so, because, you know, you can't make somebody, it takes work on the part of the student to do some remediation and so on. So, and there are other things that can be done besides intensive remediation. There's technology that can be used and so on. So if the emotional issues, which are secondary probably to the, to the original learning disability, are not addressed, it can make remediation just really, really challenging.
Okay,
So
well, I did share the contact information for the Learning Center in the chat, so if anyone needs
Great.
that, there.
Great. Yeah, that's a good place to start.
All right, well, that was all of the questions.
Wow, that's great. Well, I am delighted that, thank you very much, folks, for being here. And, and I hope this was helpful to you. And if you have further questions, shoot them to Joanna, who will shoot them to me. And I will do my best to answer.
All right, sounds good. And everybody, you'll be getting a follow-up email tomorrow that'll have my contact information in it, as well as the handouts from Ellen. So please look for that in your inbox. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Terrific. Thank you.